A Russian woman criticized the policy of Russian President Vladimir Putin towards Ukraine, including the so-called special operation, asking a rhetorical question regarding the original Chinese lands that are now part of the Russian Federation. The woman quite reasonably noted that Russians who advocate for the SVO in Ukraine should not resist if official Beijing suddenly announces the beginning of a similar military operation on the territory of the Russian Federation to return the original Chinese lands. Does it mean that China is then obliged to conduct a military offensive in the Far East and return its historical lands? And then the Russians should not object because China has the right to restore historical justice? She emphasized. In addition, the Russian woman reminded the authorities of her country that when the Soviet Union collapsed and an independent Russian Federation and an independent Ukraine were formed, both sides signed the relevant documents and took on the obligation to respect each other's borders. Recall, China has a long historical memory of Far Eastern territories being seized by the Russians. In the mid-19th century, at the end of the Opium Wars, the weak Qing dynasty ceded 1.4 million square kilometers of land, including the whole area east of the Ussuri and northeast of the Amur River to the Pacific coast in what was then called Outer Manchuria and now constitutes much of Russia's Far East. This territory annexed to the Tsarist Empire in the Aigun 1858 and Beijing 1860 treaties was later absorbed by the Soviet Union. By some calculations, the total territory once under Chinese imperial sovereignty that passed to Russian control amounted to almost 6 million square kilometers. As early as 1919, when the outcome of the Russian Civil War was still in doubt, Lev Karakan, the Deputy People's Commissar for Foreign Affairs of the Soviet Union, made promises to China that the Soviet Union would return the Chinese people all that had been taken from them by the Tsarist Empire during the period of so-called unequal treaties. The Soviet government made clear that for this to happen, it would be necessary, first of all, to put an end to the invasion of Manchuria and Siberia by brigands. A few months later, with Soviet forces victorious in the Civil War and less in need of help from China, Karakan's offer was withdrawn, but not forgotten in Beijing. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia has claimed to be its legal successor. By this logic, from China's point of view, Moscow would be responsible for fulfilling unkept Soviet promises to return Russian Far East territories. And since taking power in 1999, President Vladimir Putin has made a series of gestures toward settling these disputes. According to recent Chinese official statements, under his leadership, Russia has on 4 separate occasions returned a total of 173 square kilometers of territory to Chinese sovereignty. Of course, compared to the larger claim of nearly 6 million square kilometers of occupied territory mentioned above, this is only a drop in the ocean. Soldiers of the 34th Separate Motorized Infantry Battalion, Volkodavi, showed what Vovchansk, in the Kharkiv region, looks like now. Exactly 1 year ago, the Russians began their offensive in this direction. As the battalion reported, the Russian occupiers shelled the city with artillery, missiles and aerial bombs all night, and in the morning they began assault operations. Already on May the 10th, 2024, the 34th Separate Motorized Infantry Battalion, Wolfhounds, accepted the battle. The battalion was initially stationed in the settlement of Tikho. This is the eastern outskirts of Volchansk. We stopped the enemy and even carried out offensive actions. Then it was decided to transfer us to the city of Volchansk itself. And from that moment on, we have been stationed in Volchansk for more than 10 months. During this time, we have not lost our positions. The battalion holds its defense area. Then there was a large-scale operation to liberate the aggregate plant in Volchansk. After the plant was liberated, we carried out a cleanup, and it also moved into our zone of responsibility, noted the commander of the Fartovi battalion. It is noted that during this year the city was practically razed to the ground. Also, the difficult conditions of urban combat have become almost impossible, so the defense has to be maintained in ruins. All that's left of the houses are bricks and concrete fragments. Under them are holes. This is a war in holes. We are in holes. The occupiers are in holes. We see the enemy moving. The infantry comes out and shoots them. That's the whole tactic. Everything is simple and complicated at the same time, the commander emphasized. In addition, equipment cannot enter the city and the work of artillery is limited. So in such conditions, the infantry comes to the forefront. Where there is no infantryman, there is no front. The infantry works here. All other units work for it. You can be a super cool drone pilot, but there are no infantrymen in front of you who will hold off the enemy. Then what's the point of you being a great flyer of a javelin shooter? The emphasis is on the infantry. The most attention is on the infantry because the infantry bears the greatest burden of war, says Fartovi. According to him, the enemy conducts assault operations daily, unsuccessfully trying to push through the Ukrainian defense. It is noted that in just 4 months of this year, the wolfhounds destroyed more than 500 occupiers. I think this is a deliberate tactic on their part. For example, 3 fighters are sitting in our position. They make attacks. The first one dies, the second one dies, and they continue like this, counting on some catsup to finally reach them and jump in. There is still some shooting, throwing grenades, and the fighters themselves are exhausted. And sometimes Russian commanders deceive their superiors that someone has entered and ask people to consolidate their positions, counting on someone else to be given in order to try to finish off the pressure, the battalion commander noted. As noted by Fartovi, while the military is holding back the occupiers in this direction, they are protecting other settlements. They are weakening the front somewhere, and other units, assault, airborne, are advancing somewhere in other directions, and we are standing here. This is our job, the military man noted. The Wolfhounds press service also added in a statement, Volchansk has become a meat grinder for the Russians, into which they constantly throw new meat, proving that human lives are nothing to them. The occupiers are razing the once beautiful industrial city to the ground, proving that all they need is territory. We will gnaw at this wild pack as long as it takes. We will avenge every destroyed house and ruined life.